Hi everyone, I'm Tomas from Nethermind, but you might have seen me earlier as Tesa from Flashbots.
This is 2024.
I'll let the panelists introduce themselves, although they've just basically spoken, so it's a quick intro.
I really shouldn't be stranger. I'm founder of Luban, built something tangentially related to Preconfirmation, block space, all the fun stuff. Yeah.
Kevin, ETHGas, founder of ETHGas, happy to be here, and thank you, Thomas and Tesa, for joining us.
So I was wondering if you could explain to the audience, number one, a brief overview of pre-comps in case they weren't here earlier and in case they don't know, and then maybe a little bit of a background of how we got to this pre-comps sort of thing.
I guess I'll start.
Yeah, I think you have a better idea on background than I do.
Okay. So Preconfirmation in simple terms is basically having the block proposer be an L1 block proposer, aka validator, or L2 proposer, give a commitment to the buyer of the block space, saying that I will include your transaction into my block. There could be some associated conditions come with that. For example, execution guarantees or ordering guarantees. So the user can use this commitment, which is normally a signed request, to slash the block proposer if the block proposer didn't really honor the commitment. So that's definitely longer than I thought it would be, but that's my definition of pre-confirmation. So for us, how we got to pre-confirmation. So that's a good question. So back in the day, I was dipping my toes in MEV searching. There was a very popular thing called a gas token. Not sure if any one of you is aware of that. I still have some of those in my wallets, but they no longer work because of a protocol level update. So the way it worked was you can buy the gas, store the gas into this particular contract, then you can use the self-destruct opcode to destroy this contract and free some of the gas. So in a way, you're hedging the gas. So this becomes very handy for searchers because you get this deterministic cost basis for any kind of a strategy you run. But like I said, after a protocol level update, that thing doesn't work. So me personally, I was pretty sad about that. So I wanted to build something somewhat similar to that. So I tried to build a newer version of a gas token from different approaches. I tried using a CDP model, having a gas token pegged to the historical average of the base fee, but of course that ran into the problem that there's a no short side of the base fee. We also try to have some more like a quantitative model, basically using a more financial engineering approach to craft an on-chain financial product to hedge the gas fee. But I think none of which are very elegant solutions. So toward the end of last year, we started looking at the traditional market, like commodity market in particular. So what are the necessary components for a healthy market to function? Because in our view, we very much see block space as this kind of unique commodity, not necessarily fungible. It has a fungibility, but also non-fungible aspects of it. So how can we create a market for that? So first, we started looking at the transaction pipeline. Who are the seller of who should be in the position to sell the block space? So I think our conclusion is basically either builder or the validator. The problem with the builder is that the builder, you don't know who's going to win the block auction in advance. So that left us with only one option, basically the validator. So if the validator is the seller, we need to figure out a way to ask them to put in the collateral, because what if they don't actually honor the commitment that they have issued to the buyer? So Eigenlayer, Symbiotic, is also those restaking protocols come in pretty handy, where you have this capital efficient methods to bootstrap a validator to start doing this. So the last problem is, how do we make it work with the existing transaction pipeline, namely PBS? So we were thinking about building our own sidecar to make sure to facilitate this a single purpose, which is allow the proposers to sell the block space in advance. It just so happened that Drew from previously, Brevin Howard started this initiative called Commit Boost. And through just different conversations, we got to know each other, which I feel like we're very mission aligned. So ever since, we've been using Commit Boost, which led to the current product that we're having today. So basically, we have a pre-confirmation protocol where the validators can delegate the pre-conf duty to a third party. And this particular third party will issue price pre-confirmations on behalf of the validator through Commit Boost. And the rest of it works very much like PBS. So that's a very long story. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's basically our journey to pre-confirmation.
And Kevin, do you have anything to add there?
Maybe just very briefly, I got into the space because I got COVID and I was stuck in a hotel room and kind of wanted something to do, so I just dove into it. But yeah, we started looking primarily at just trading the base fee within a futures market context, and so we built a protocol. We deployed it within a closed environment in about February this year. The problem was the dynamics between I'd call like sophisticated players and retail players. Basically, you get a bunch of the institutional, sophisticated guys who have mempool information, but then you have retail who have no idea what goes on in the mempool, and so it kind of leads to this dynamic where it's a one-sided market. And we built that fully on chain, and it just kind of fizzled apart when you kind of simulate what happens. And so from that point, we basically looked at how do we build this more within a traditional centralized approach where like lower latency, higher throughput, central limit order book. But then how do we extend it not just from trading gas from a futures context, but how do we do it in the context of, this is kind of Q1 in the context of pre-confirmations, other type of commitment products. And so if you can kind of label and unify all the various types of commitment products into a single marketplace, it just felt like that would capture more MEV, it would be like fairer, cleaner. And so that's kind of where we are today.
So you guys have already kind of mentioned how you guys are building with pre-confs. How do you imagine the pre-confirmation scene evolving, both in mainnet and within L2 space?
I think our current focus is purely on mainnet, because I think pre-confirmation, if we're talking about pre-conf in roll-up context, is more about a basis sequencing. I believe Tyco is the only one out there that's doing basis sequencing and also live, and they're having a lot of problems with that. So I think it's a bit early for us to gather enough data point to say we're just going to go into the roll-up state and start doing the pre-conf. But I think for L1, I think there's a very clear pathway to find the product market fit. So basically, any entity that buys L1 block space, resell that to their users, are the users of pre-confirmation. Basically, our version of pre-confirmation, because they want to have this kind of a deterministic cost basis for their L1 block space price, so that knowing this, they can have a more flexibility in terms of how they can charge their end user. So it's really just comes down to what are the applications that we should go after. Basically, we're just going to take a very iterative approach to try different features, talking to potential users, basically throw shit on the wall and see what sticks. So for me, I think it's a bit early to tell like how this market is going to eventually evolve, but I think at least that's our current approach when it comes to like finding the product market fit.
I think we'll be in testnet for a while, and I'm not just saying myself, but some of the other guys. Largely being that there's a certain amount of inertia and energy that one has to overtake in the industry to basically adopt like a new framework around building blocks and the different type of commitment products. And so, if I'm a big validator, what is the risk to opting into some other approach around optimizing that block? Because I might incur like negative carry or basically like a lower returns over some period of time until there's sufficient adoption. So I think irrespective of what we're doing specifically, or Harry, or some of the other ones, I think we need to basically achieve a little bit of a consensus, or at least a standardization in terms of what the industry wants here, and then kind of like a jumping off point to do so. Maybe that might happen around DevCon later this year when a number of initiatives are converging. But basically, I think at some point you'll probably need 2/3 of the validators, a whole bunch of searchers and traders to say like, hey, this sounds good, let's set a go live date. And we all kind of set up a test date to at least try it within a mainnet environment, but then still have that ability to kind of roll back to the extent it doesn't work. Because I think if you try to roll out these products kind of piecemeal a little bit, like you're not going to achieve that kind of critical mass where you have enough players participating in the market for it to actually stick and for it to make sense. But yeah, in terms of timeline, I'd say maybe around DevCon we start to get a bit more, again, consensus in terms of like how both the sellers of gas and the buyers want this to evolve, and then maybe Q1 we're testing it within a mainnet environment with a bit of a industry consortium sort of supporting it broadly.
And so do you think that with this adoption, and if testing goes well, that Ethereum mainnet plus pre-comps would turn Ethereum closer to something like Solana or other ecosystems that have massive throughput?
I think absolutely. So at least on our side, our approach was, can you give centralized like latency or confirmations, right? So if we can get 3 millisecond pre-confirmation finality on the pre-confirmation itself, then basically I have a decentralized chain, but I have like instant settlement. And when you can combine instant settlement with kind of some of the intent base and off-chain order books, so you basically have like off-chain order books, you have off-chain pre-confirmations, then at that point you've basically maxed out Ethereum, and so you could push whatever the gas limit can support at that point in time. And so if it's 30 million gas units and it's like a transfer between me and you at the end of the day, that's like 130 TPS on Ethereum. So I think that's a very real possibility as like a step one. I think once you involve the base rollups, then you have that extra kind of gas space to kind of work with. And so I think at that point, when you can have real-time pre-confirmations plus at least one based L2 that's up for it, I think at that point you're at 10,000 TPS across just a single Ethereum plus one based rollup. That'd be pretty awesome.
Harry, you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know much about Solana, to be honest. Like, people brag about like
it's fast.
It's fast, yeah.
Okay, I had a lot of failed transactions, and I had an NFT there, and it just got rogged and never used again. So I never really felt like people say it's a good user experience, but I got a lot of failed transactions. So I don't know. Like, I don't know Solana well enough to have an opinion on this particular matter, but I feel like I think a lot of people are trying to compare, like especially in the Ethereum community, like saying like, seeing Solana being this almost like a milestone for user experience, and Ethereum should catch up. In my opinion, I think it's probably Solana and Ethereum are actually catering to different crowds. So at least when I design our protocol, I'm not making a conscious decision to say, I want Ethereum to be like Solana. I just want like a more flexible way where people can express their transactional contentions. So I think that's where I'm coming from. So I really don't have a very strong opinion on
but you would want like a real time or like a fast confirmation, right?
I think that's to us that's only a side effect of it. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So I think maybe Max might be the only person that wants Ethereum to be like Solana. But do you think that Solana has this spam problem? And I think that's what you're alluding to with your user experience. Does pre-confirmation solve that? Because on L2s, like base, you have a similar situation. You have a lot of spamminess. Mm-hmm. Would pre-confirms on L2 solve this?
Absolutely. I think because none of the teams that I know of are live on mainnet, so I don't think this is a problem now. But like once we're live, this is definitely going to be a problem. So like it really comes down to like how do we solve the spamming problem? So currently we're looking closely to the public mempool spec for account abstraction. What's that? 4337. Yeah. So we're looking at the spec for their P2P network to kind of model our design to avoid the DDoS attack from if we just open the pre-conf endpoint to the public. But it's definitely one of the major problems that we expect we'll see. Yeah.
I think just coming back to the Solana point, and at least in my mind, I think the comparison is just over like faster confirmations and a more throughput. But I was going to say, I think one of the issues that Ethereum has or will have, at least if we argue or if we agree that pre-comps will make it faster on Ethereum, one of the issues we still have is on the wallet side. We still need wallets to integrate us, and so depending on what is our standard for integration versus Harry's versus someone else, I think that fragmentation raises issues on the Ethereum side. But to the extent that we can address that, then I think ultimately those wallets that interface with L1, they can have a Solana-like experience. But unfortunately, there's that one additional degree of kind of integration that we as a community would need to figure out.
So wallets is a big problem. The wallets, I mean, that's a hugely fragmented like part of the industry that a lot of people don't have a lot of clarity into. What do you think about Cake? Like, is that something that you can see pre-confirms integrating with into Cake?
I think Cake, basically the chain abstraction framework,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very necessary component, at least in my opinion, especially when it comes down to bridging. I think for bridge, if you want to bridge from another chain to Ethereum mainnet today, normally the protocol would ask a user to over-collateralize because the bridging takes time. There's a latency there. So at the point where user make the bridge transaction, they don't necessarily know what the future transaction cost will be. So the protocol asks the user to over-collateralize. So that's not a very good user experience. But if you have pre-confirmation, you have an inclusion guarantee, and now you get this deterministic pricing, even though it could be slightly more expensive than before, but user basically don't have to over-collateralize, which in my opinion is a huge UX improvement. So in that particular part, I think it's critical for chain abstraction. I believe, I'm sure there are many other places that pre-conf can fit in, but I think this, in my mind, that's definitely on top of my mind, that particular use case there.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I think in Stefan's world of Cake, he's actually trying to get a unified sort of like taxonomy going, which I think is the same issue that you're having within, I think, pre-confs, right? Is getting everybody to be on the same page, at least with that.
It'll happen over time. It's just how do we get there faster, I think.
Is there any other problems that you think pre-confs will solve? Or do you see it actually, is there anything maybe further down the line that you feel like, okay, maybe pre-conf solves this, but maybe we push something down a little bit later into the downstream aspects of it?
So on our side, we, I had one of my last slides was basically around like, if you extend the notion of pre-confs into just like broader gas market products, it's kind of like an open arena where you can kind of do whatever you want in some sense. Like if you draw the analogies to traditional commodity markets and how you can basically have different types of contracts with people trading, corn oil or whatever it might be, there are kind of negative externalities as it relates to kind of the broader end user or what have you. On our side, I think the questions are around like, if you have pre-confirmations and a proposer can sell the entire block, then do you kind of relinquish, to what extent do you relinquish control over that block? And what if you have proposers with multiple blocks that are going to sell them on blocks? You'd sell 3 blocks at a time or 6 or 30 blocks at a time. Like what are the implications of that to, for users and for maybe Ethereum as a whole? And then when you extend even further beyond that, what if a proposer says, well, I want to sell a censorship guarantee, for example, right? Where me as a trader, I want to say like, oh, I want to trade in this block, but I want to censor that wallet from competing against me or not being used, or I want to prevent someone from interfacing with this protocol. It's kind of like a completely open universe where you can kind of construct these products, and I think it's important for us to figure out like how do we not go down a dark path, but how do we go down a path which is healthy for market development and for transparency.
Anything to add, Harry?
Yeah, I think it will somewhat Kevin already alluded to, which is like having this kind of a secondary market for block space, which is really good for price discovery because on a particular block is a different placement on the block and relative position to another transactions on the block are actually non-fungible. So having this kind of a secondary market to have this price discovery mechanism is really good for transparency. If we can, in a way, having a market for top of the block, a secondary market for top of the block, then I think that's a huge improvement because today, like we have all this vertical integrations where the top builders can capture this just by having this kind of under the table deals. If we have a secondary market for that, that'll be great. But how to implement that, that's probably a bigger problem.
So within Flashbot Suave, we are looking for pre-confirmation integration, but about 10% of Ethereum blocks are not passing through the PBS system. They're going directly and being built by the validators themselves. How do you think pre-confirmations fits into that? Because now it's a little bit hazier how that actually works.
I was going to say on my side, well, you have the kind of the look-ahead window, right? And so you can kind of see among the next 32 or 64 blocks who is a self-builder and who is not. And so there's certain dynamics where within those self-built blocks, you only get a certain number of transactions, and everyone knows the next block is going to be hyper-competitive. So I think the market will adjust, but I'm not sure you can do anything with those self-builders if they don't want to opt in. I think that's part of the beauty of the decentralized set of validator sets that we have. But
so actually, in some of the self-built blocks or the self-built block builders, they're using like a little bit of a min bid. So if the block builders say like Titan or SCP, their block value doesn't cross the threshold that they set, then they'll build their blocks. So there is this like, it's not that they're just always going to build their blocks. There's no way to actually determine whether or not, unless you know their threshold block value, whether or not they will be building their block or not. So it is a little bit hard to predict whether or not they will be self-building.
yeah, I'd say just the participants who know. Well, I guess you would know who those proposers would be in advance, right? Because of their historical track record. And I guess you would just have to price that into the likelihood, perhaps. Yeah.
I think actually I have a question for you. So in the particular part, if they have this threshold value, and if the block submission from SCP or Titan doesn't exceed this threshold value, and then they will build the block themselves, is it because they can build a better block than the block builder, or why would they do that?
I don't necessarily know if they can build a better block, but they're just going out to the public mempool and building it. And there might be timing games involved, which might be why the block value from SCP or Titan might be lower, because they might have received the proposer value earlier into the block cycle. It's hard to say. Data Always has done a pretty good research report on it, and also from Block Native as well, if you're interested in that. But yeah, that is a good question, because usually the block values from the self-built builders are pretty low. Okay, 16 more minutes. Let's talk more about pre-comps. Okay, pre-comps versus execution tickets. Where do you guys stand? Hot takes.
I need to formulate an opinion because I don't have opinion on this matter. But I think we got inspired by the design of an execution ticket or this kind of lottery style proposer selection mechanism a lot when we designed our mechanism for pre-confirmer selection. In that particular regard, I think these two designs go hand in hand. Pre-conf in a way is kind of a partial block building. If the validator decides to basically offload the whole block to the pre-confirmer, basically the pre-confirmer now becomes a block builder. And if we have the same selection mechanism very much like an execution ticket, then in a way we're doing out of a protocol execution ticket just to test the water. So I think in my opinion, they go hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah, similarly, I see it like you can sell like a car, or you can sell all its like individual parts. And so if you could ideally, if the two were fungible for one another, if I could sell a part and then if I could sell a block and then strip it into some set of parts, then that provides, I think, the most choice and probably the most value capture. So, but we'll see how execution tickets evolve as well.
Yeah, from the Flashbots perspective, I think we thought execution tickets were incredibly centralizing. They're going to go toward the highest bidder and lead to possible multi-block MEV opportunities. Speaking of which, pre-comps, what are your thoughts about the MEV aspects around that?
Yeah, I think a multi-block MEV is definitely one of the problems. I think there are people smarter than I am can have a better understanding of how likely that will happen. But I think in theory today, like Lido can do multi-block MEV. They don't do it mostly because of the social consensus. I think probably the ideal design for this kind of a proposer, pre-confirmer selection, which definitely have to happen before in real time, basically ex ante auction versus just-in-time auction. So there will introduce this vector for multi-block MEV. The way to mitigate that is basically you have to introduce a lot of entropies between different slots, plus a little bit of a social consensus. I think just by having one, not the other, is not good, but having both, I think, can slightly better. But I don't think that's the best solution, but it's probably something that we have to tackle with when we become live.
I'm kind of not sure how we would avoid multi-block MEV in the next year or so, or kind of give or take. I think if you, as you mentioned, like Lido, but like I think if you have a number of the larger builders, that can not only sell like 1, 2, 3 consecutive blocks, but if they're aligned with other proposers who can sell multi-blocks, if they're aligned with, if you were to group together all the economically rational proposers, that's that'd be like the 90%. Basically who opt into MEV Boost. And so arguably if there was like a default setting where they could, through commit Boost or some other sidecar, basically say, I just want the most optimal payoff, I think that invariably leads to a path of multi-block MEV. And so that's something as an industry we'll need to figure out. On our side, it's something, do we enable that capability? Do we want to have someone guide us or help us in that process? But I think that given 90% of the proposers or validators are economically motivated, I think we'll absolutely end up there. Yeah.
Given that searchers and say integrated searchers like SEP, Wintermute, would they have an advantage using pre-comps in their SexDex arbitrage?
The way we've designed our venue is, well, we kind of rewrite the PBS pipeline. So we have, within traditional PBS, you have a bunch of builders. But we're saying that within each slot, there should be like a single unified gateway, which captures all the deal flow. So in that single gateway with all the deal flow, you're basically putting the integrated builders on their back foot. They're unable to take as much advantage as they have been historically, because we basically try to capture all that MEV into that single block. So in our structure, I'd say we are able to better capture their rent, or the amount that they're trying to extract through our structure. But we'll see in practice. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought about this. I think, yes, definitely. Integrated searchers can definitely leverage pre-confirmation by having a more low-risk way to secure basically on top of the block to facilitate the SexDex arbitrage. Because to have pre-conf, you almost always have to know who is going to be the pre-confirmer for a particular slot. And if this integrated builder and searchers are able to get this particular slot, then they basically control what goes into the block. And because all these builders also run their block builders, so they can make sure that if they are also the pre-confirmer, they can always make sure that the top of the block is reserved just for themselves. So it's definitely just easier for them to do this. No value judgment there, but I think in theory it should be easier.
I think this also becomes like a cost of capital issue. So for example, like with, ultimately we're going from like 4 builders, or a handful of builders to proposers who can provide like absolute guarantees. And the only one who can really absolutely kind of change this nature is like a proposer who is also an integrated trader, right? And so if a SCP, right now they have, I don't know, 40% of the blocks or whatever the number might be, but as a proposer, they might have like 0. X%. And so I think it definitely shifts the power largely in the proposer's favor. I guess the question is, does it shift it too largely in their favor?
So do you think this would kind of level the playing field for new builders to come in, given that, okay, you already know who the proposer is going to be, maybe you stack some of your...
For sure.
Yeah.
In our case, so with us, what you can do is basically anyone can buy a block, but you can't see what other trades might potentially be in there. You can only know that this block will be decomposed into a mix of execution guarantees or inclusion pre-comps. But in that context, you can bring, again, like a GSR or like some other kind of other market makers into this equation who can buy blocks and then kind of decompose them into their constituent parts. And so in our model, you go from the standard PBS flow with, say, 4 builders to this model where you can have a bunch of macro traders who just want to trade the vol markets versus the block markets. And so in that case, you'd have like maybe 40, 50 builders or pseudo builders in our context.
Yeah, very much agree. I think just building the pre-conf block requires a different skill set than building the block that we know of today. Like basically today, we build a block, we're basically solving this knapsack problem, and the builder doesn't necessarily take on too much risk. But building the pre-conf blocks, there's definitely a risk involved. So there has to be a little bit of portfolio management skills involved, which is not something that block builders that I am aware of do today. So I think it's probably attracted different crowds.
So do you think that now that we have our pre-conf block, we're just pushing the problem down into subsets of auctioning off the different portions of the block? Like now we have a top of block auction, now we have a blob space,
Exactly,
now we have like...
Yeah, I think the more that you can kind of commoditize those products, then you can kind of flip between one or the other. And at some point, you can bring participants into that marketplace who potentially could have no care or understanding about the actual gas markets. They just see that one instrument can trade versus these 6 other instruments, and I can go back and forth. And that's kind of like a market maker's, ideal environment where, you might be trading some token, but you don't actually know about their views on decentralization. You're just trading the numbers, and you're running a book. So I think that's a great case to introduce a lot more builders into this market.
So in your side, you'd have like specialized builders for like bottom of the block. Like I'm running bottom of the block auctions within my TE environment, and then I'll pass that over to the pre-confirmed block.
Well, in our case, no, you wouldn't have builders who build specific parts of the block. It's more that you would have products which represent certain aspects of the block, but we would all trade these products together against one another. So in the context of my car example earlier, if you have you could buy a car, and if you could strip it into its 6 pieces, arguably, then you can kind of flip back and forth, and all you need to care is that I'm selling a certain piece here for a certain price, and if we have real-time pricing for all those components, then this is kind of analogous to trading like the price of an option versus trading the Greeks. You can just run a book, and any quant shop can do that. So
Ethereum becomes a chop shop?
No, not necessarily. We open it up to more players. Okay. Right? See, right now we have, there's only a certain number of quant shops who know how to build blocks and do it properly, I guess, with the deal flow. But I just think that we can bring in a different set of players.
Oh, I said chop shop, not quant shop.
Sorry.
Like car chop shop. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. Is there any other topics you guys want to talk about? Otherwise, I'm going to open it up to the audience. Anybody have questions regarding pre-confs out there? Everything answered? Scratching heads? Pre-confs are great. Yay, pre-confs. All right, I think, unless you guys want to say something, anything else to Shell? We have 5 minutes.
No, I was just going to say, don't put your hands up if you want pre-confs. There we go.
All right, thanks, Tessa.
All right,
All
thanks,
right.
guys.
Thanks, Tess.